Okay.
Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, with me, as promised, I have a really good interview today. The interview is going to center around what has been, I guess, seen as attacks on Tulsi Gabbard. It's almost like they were trying to get her out the race the moment that she got into the race. But some of the ties or some of the issues that came up had to do with Hindu nationalism. And in some respects, the Hindu nationalism thing has become somewhat of a touchstone or somewhat of a hitting point. Because, like I said, I've had people call me saying or tell me that the pieces that have been going after Tulsi Gabbard have been somewhat unfair. Some people have said they've gone so far as to be bigoted. And others, I guess I'm new to Indian politics. And so I'm open to perspectives on this. And I want to be fair in regards to my appraisal of Tulsi or anybody else when you're bringing this stuff up, especially when it gets into this slippery slope of this idea of religion and tolerance. So I don't want my context, which doesn't necessarily have Indian politics in it. I don't know what's right here, so I kind of want to know more information. I'm going to get more information. Zaid Jilani is the person I have with me. He's a political journalist. He broke a story apparently talking about Tulsi's Hindu nationalist ties. But recently he wrote an article, I think this came out a couple of days ago, saying that it has been sloppy, unfair, and somewhat bigoted. And so I asked Zaid Jilani to come on. He's here. Please tell the audience hello, and let's have a conversation about the article that you wrote. I want to get into it.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm really glad that your audience is into this issue, because I think it's really interesting. It's not the kind of thing that usually comes up during a campaign, but I think it says a lot about U.S. politics and how it interacts with the rest of the world.
I think it's an important issue. I mean, I find there's some degree of unfairness in the attacks that are made on Tulsi on some of this stuff. Like Obama and Hillary Clinton were perfectly okay with Modi, and no one made one peep about it. It never came up, wasn't an issue at all. You also have the second thing of the overweight or the outright influence of Israel in the United States politics. And this doesn't necessarily seem to be somewhat of a big issue, even though it's all now brought up that, there's going to be some kind of Indian nationalists that are going to have this kind of outsized influence in politics if Tulsi Gabbard gets in office. It just seems a little bit unfair, some of the attacks. But that said, let's be honest. And I'll just ask you, I'm not going to say let's be honest. What's unfair about the attacks that are being leveled at Tulsi? I read your article. What do you perceive as being sloppy and unfair? And before that, you said you broke the article saying that she had Hindu nationalist ties. Explain that. Explain that. I'm adding a lot in this question. Explain the Hindu nationalist ties that you broke the article. That's the first point. The second point, the difference between being Hindu and Hindu nationalists, and is that being conflated here in regards to the association with Tulsi Gabbard, and also what has been sloppy and unfair about it. I know that's a lot in one question, but I'm throwing it out there.
Sure. Yeah, so in 2015, basically, what I did is I wrote an article for Alternate, and basically what I did is I looked at the composition of Tulsi Gabbard's support with respect to a lot of this congressional and sort of outside activism she was doing with relation to India. So I noticed that she was doing a lot of going to events for American supporters of the BJP, which is a right-wing party in India. She was going on Fox News and talking, using kind of right-wing talking points to some extent, saying, Obama doesn't like to say radical Islamic terrorism, we should be saying that. Basically, she seemed to be catering towards sort of the Hindu nationalist political segment. Now, what is that? Basically, Hindu nationalism is kind of a political strain within India that basically advocates for Hinduism being the sort of the basis of your politics, has a very us versus them view of the world versus Hindus versus Muslims and Sikhs, who are the two largest religious minorities in India. And I think that she had basically situated herself in a position where she wanted to be seen as someone who was supporting that kind of politics, going probably even beyond just having diplomatic relations with India or with Prime Minister Modi. But I think what happened was between 2015 and now, I think she sort of took a lot of those criticisms to heart that came after my article. And I think she's put some distance between herself and those sort of folks now. She doesn't necessarily go to events that are right-wing in orientation on India. She does definitely still talk to Indian Americans, go to their events, talk to Hindu Americans, many of whom are not right-wing, are not nationalists. Many of them are in the center or on the left. But I think she's more balanced about it. And I think there were at least 3 or 4 articles recently written about this that didn't really notice that change in the way that her politics is situated. I think these people were kind of catching up to the story, and they were kind of writing it as if the 2015 situation is still the present. Whereas the reality is, I think Gabbard has moderated quite a bit and has kind of realized that she was tilting too much to one side of the Indian political spectrum. And I think that's really the kind of mistake that some of these recent articles made, is that they just weren't caught up to date.
Let me ask you this. So going with the thing, one of the guests I had, Peter Friedrich, was on the show the other day, and he kind of made this point that the BJP were synonymous with the Klan. Is that accurate, or is that a little bit off? Is there some kind of moderating leeway into that description?
Well, I think okay, so the BJP is kind of a large party in India. India has somewhat of a similar dynamic to the United States in that it has 2 basic large parties. It has a few minor parties that have power in some cities, but they don't really have much power beyond that. So the 2 major parties are the Congress Party, which is kind of like their version of the Democrats, and the BJP is their version of the Republicans. And I wouldn't quite say, they are the Klan, because the Klan at one point were violent extremists. Today they're a very fringe group. The BJP is kind of a mainstream right-wing group. Now, within the BJP, we do have extreme elements, similar to how perhaps Steve King in the United States is somewhat different politics than someone like Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, right?
Right.
They're both Republicans, but there is a wing of the Republicans that are just outright cultural chauvinists that just are very nativistic, promote xenophobia, racism, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is that faction of the BJP that's very, I think they're more powerful at the local and kind of grassroots level. I think Prime Minister Modi he's definitely right-wing in orientation, but he hasn't quite elevated those people like some people feared that he would. So I don't think it's quite accurate to say that they're like the Klan. It's definitely true that they're a right-wing party, though. And it's definitely true that they do have some extreme elements at the grassroots level who, would engage in things like praising mob violence, praising sectarian violence, outright discrimination, things like that. So those people exist within that party coalition, although they don't run it right now.
Is one of those people Modi himself? And let me ask it this way. When Modi was in office, I think the big thing that they hit Tulsi Gabbard with is an association with Modi. And the reason they hit her with this is because Modi, at least the way, what he's accused of and what I've seen of it, everything that I've looked into it, seemed that there's been some relation to it, even if they don't necessarily want to say that he outright told people to go and murder Muslims. But he gets that seems to be somewhat of either a dereliction of duty, if you want to put it at the most nicest, politest way, with regards to mob violence in this case. And I'm talking about specifically the 2,000 people that were killed, and I think it was like 1,000 that were Muslim. Is it fair to make the association between Tulsi Gabbard and Modi on this? First, is it fair to hit Modi on this? And B, is it fair to make the association between Tulsi Gabbard and Modi as if she's perfectly okay with what took place?
Well, one, I do think, okay, so to step back, so the Indian Prime Minister used to be governor basically of a region of India. Within that region of India, there was very severe mob violence. There was very severe mob violence after a terrorist attack. There was a terrorist attack by kind of Islamist-type leaning people, and then there was really extreme mob violence by Hindu nationalists against Muslims that was very widespread.
But wait, and basically, just so we're clear, they don't know. Right. Like the train that burned down, Modi came out and said it was like Pakistani intelligence. Right. Everything that I've read at this point, it's still somewhat of an uncertainty, but it's possible that the train burned down for something. True. Yeah, that took place inside. But perspectives of it, yes. That's
very true. And Pakistani intelligence, that certainly has not been shown or proven. Right. So I should, that if anyone, had he said that, other people said that, that's not accurate. But basically, the issue was that there was some type of tragedy that was perceived by the Hindu community as targeting them. And in response to that, you saw massive mob violence, thousands of people killed, many rapes, injuries, so on and so forth. And what happened was Modi was presiding over this region as that was happening as governor, and basically he failed to stop it. Some people say that he kind of let it happen. Some people say he was just, another interpretation is that he was afraid to kind of stand up to these people. But that, I think, is what made many people very fearful when he actually rose to become the PM of India, that he would also be negligent when it came to standing up to the extremists in BJP and extremists within the Hindu right. Which I think, if you were to assess his record, he probably has had an okay record in terms of opposing violence, although he's not as active in terms of, the same way Republicans spent years before saying anything about Steve King. He might be kind of taking that kind of tack with some of these people, kind of keeping them in the coalition, but not really pushing them out or marginalizing them the way he should be. With respect to Tulsi, I think a few years ago it was completely accurate to say that she was going to events specifically for his political party, wearing sashes that had the logo of his political party. She kind of was acting almost as if she is supportive of him being the Prime Minister of India, not just doing diplomacy with him because he is. I think in the years since, she has distanced herself. She doesn't really go to party functions anymore. She goes to larger Indian American type groups that I think represent supporters of Modi, opponents of Modi. So I think that's just the thing people have to recognize. I understand that people want to place it in context and say that at one point she was doing this, that's problematic to us, that makes us concerned. But I think they should also recognize that she has distanced herself since then, and she has moderated her politics somewhat. And so they should just understand the full scope of the history between them.
I think that's fair. And, when I look at this in the context of what are her policies and what is she trying to espouse, and what is she trying to do in the office, and what is she saying she's trying to do, and is there a track record of her trying to do it? I kind of look at it in that context. I don't, it's like all of these guys to some degree have something that's, that's a taint on the person. And an argument can be made is her association with Modi, is it a taint on her? Personally, I think to some degree it is. But again, there's this question of weight. How much weight do you put behind that, and what do you believe that that's going to tangibly look like in the world, and objective reality when it comes to what she's trying to espouse in policy? But what do you think? Like, so what is the fear here? What do you believe that people are scared of in regards to Tulsi getting in office with the association with the Modi thing? And do you think this is, religious? What's the word I'm looking for? A certain religious bigotry associated with the attacks that's been leveled against Tulsi on this?
Well, I think, in particular, the recent articles, just the recent articles that were written about Tulsi, at least the past 3 or 4 in Intercept, Mother Jode, some of these articles, I think some of them, they were eager to go after Tulsi for some of, I think, the legitimate ties to the BJP from a few years ago, but they ended up lumping in a lot of mainstream Hindu American and Indian American organizations. So, for instance, a couple of these articles took aim at the Hindu American Foundation, HAF, which is a very mainstream kind of nonprofit group. They have left-wing Indians, they have right-wing Indians involved. They do advocacy. Mostly they do advocacy on just kind of elevating Hindu Americans. Like, they want California to do more celebrating Hindu history in their textbooks, or they want, more Hindu American politicians elected, whether they be on the left or the right. They really aren't a right-wing group in any way, shape, or form. And I think they were portrayed as a Hindu nationalist organization. I mean, the Intercept article even listed out the names of people with Hindu origins. Because the names in India, you can usually tell whether a person is Muslim or Hindu by their name. And they just listed off a whole bunch of them and said, well, she's gotten such and such amount of money from Hindu Americans, therefore she's this. Which is just, that's not how you can, that's really not a proper way to look at this, because just because you're Hindu doesn't mean you are a Hindu nationalist. Just because you're a Hindu doesn't mean you're a right-winger. I mean, there are Hindus all over the political spectrum, just like any other group in America. And I think because of that, some of these articles, I think they just overshot the truth here, and I think they ended up kind of stigmatizing somebody just for being Hindu, which is not an issue. In America, you can be whatever religion or not religion you want, and you can run for office. And I think that's really where they kind of went over the line.
essentially that's the problem with some of the stories that came out immediately after Tulsi put her campaign out. Do you think that this was like, personally, I'm somewhat cynical on this. I'm inclined to believe that they were trying to hit her in the knees before she ever got off the starting gates, almost in some respects as retribution for, you know, backing Sanders, in some respects for going against democratic norms in regards to things like the war in Syria and those type of things. Is there reality to it? Do you believe that there's somewhat of reality to, I guess you could say, the argument that the BJP is influence, or it has a certain degree of influence? And for that matter, like you said, some of this is not even just BJP. They were even going for just Hindus. That you know, all of these Hindus are giving her money. They're going to have an influence on Tulsi. Is there any fear in that? Is there anything real in that? Like, let's put the association with Modi to the side for the moment. Is there anything real in this idea of, I guess you could say, this group having an outsized influence politically? I guess I'm asking, is there anything to see here, or is this somewhat out of whole cloth?
Well, okay, so a few years ago, like I said, Gabbard had spent, I think, a lot of time directly or more indirectly, but kind of supporting BJP type politics, praising the American supporters, trying to raise money from American supporters of the BJP. And I think now a lot of what she's doing is not so much of that. It is probably having an influence that so many Indian Americans are interested in her bid, that are interested in her being in Congress, because, you know, she does introduce things like resolutions talking about the persecution of Hindu minorities in neighboring countries from India, which I think is a big cause for Indian Americans. And
well,
so,
I look at this as kind of like Obama and African Americans. And I was wondering if, you know, if this is the way that this is kind of playing out, where as an African American, Obama like maxed out like 95, 96%, some insane amount of people, African Americans, voted for Democrats when Obama was in office. Now, those African Americans, the overwhelming majority would have voted Democrat anyway. But man, there was an extra, you know, the extra ketchup or extra whatever on top of it because he was African American. I look at it, is it like that? I mean, it's not so much that the BJP is trying to take control of the political space in the United States. Is it more along the lines of people who are Hindu are supporting somebody who's Hindu, and people who are Indian are supporting somebody who's Indian?
I mean, I think that's probably a lot of this. I think that basically with any community, when they have one of their own kind of going up there, there is at least a kind of a pull on them. They feel at least somewhat pressure to support their own. So I think when, you know, Barack Obama was a great example, of course, but there are many other examples. I think that many of the Armenian Americans tend to organize and give money to people from their community to go to Congress, and also those champion their causes. I think we've seen this with there are groups dedicated to electing Latino members of Congress, like Latino Victory Fund. There are definitely African American groups who do it. There's Jewish American groups that do it. Rashida Tlaib, who was just elected out of Michigan, Palestinian American Muslim woman. I know that she heavily fundraised with a national Muslim American base. So I think, yeah, a lot of this just is that, and I don't think it should be any more unusual when it's Hindu Americans versus any of these other groups. And I think that's a fair point.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Is there anything? Okay, here's a question. Satan Sin, Jamal, is he saying that people tied with the RSS are just regular folks?
Oh, with the RSS?
Yes, I think their issue is, and I think their point is, that there was a radical group within the context of, or the BJP, the radical arm of the BJP, or something to that effect. But I think their point is, if there are links between those things, that's, you know, they're not just regular folks. Like, it's not, there's a difference between Hindus and Hindu nationalists. I think your point, though, is that she's moved away from those hard right positions for groups like the BJP, and people have been hitting her on stuff where she's not necessarily standing in that spot anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really it. I think she was explicitly kind of attending meetings with people who are explicitly supporting one faction in Indian politics previously. I think now she's spending more time with organizations like the Hindu American Foundation, HAF, which really just represents all kinds of Indian members and Hindu members of Congress, including Democrats. I mean, I think majority of who they support are Democrats. And I don't think that they're always necessarily always supporting the right wing of Indian politics. I think they kind of run the spectrum because they're trying to represent everybody in the country. I mean, you have to remember, just as Indian politics is split between Congress Party and BJP, I mean, Indian American politics in terms of who they would support back home would be the same way. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough. Zaid Jilani, I really appreciate you coming on. I know this was somewhat short notice. I read your article. I'm putting your article at the bottom of this, and I thought it had a decent point. I mean, I had, like I said, I was getting several emails saying, it was not fair, that the arguments that's being made against Tulsi Gabbard are not fair, and that many of these are being done for religious reasons. That essentially this is somewhat religious bigotry that others don't necessarily have to deal with. I don't know if I fully buy the fully religious bigotry argument, because there were associations. I mean, you yourself would own up to Modi being involved in thousands of people being killed, and even the number of violent crimes in India are scaling up. I mean, they always hit Donald Trump with this number, but the numbers are going up.
Well, I think that the issue with the bigotry is, I think when people start looking at ordinary Hindu Americans who are supporting her and then implying that they are nationalists,
that's a problem
without the evidence being there, right? Because I think many of them are supporting her just because they like having a fellow Hindu there. She was the first Hindu American ever elected to Congress. Just as there are Muslims who would support Rashida Tlaib, or before her Keith Ellison or Ilhan Omar, they also have all kinds of politics, but they all might support them because they're Muslim and they want to see a fellow Muslim in there. But we shouldn't automatically assume, just looking at those particular Muslim donors or activists, and automatically assume their politics without looking into it. We should look into it first before we make that assumption.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. And this is a fair point coming from the person who essentially broke the story that she had Hindu nationalist ties. Like, it's like, I bought out the fact that she had Hindu nationalist ties, but oh my God, you guys have taken this and run with it in a direction that you shouldn't have ran with it. So, fair enough. Thank you, Zaid Jilani. Columnist, even for The Intercept. You've been writing stories for The Intercept also, correct?
I was a reporter for The Intercept for the past 3 years, but I recently took off because I'm doing a fellowship over at Berkeley.
Oh, okay.
Basically, where I'm working on social and political polarization, writing about research on that. So until recently, I was with The Intercept, yes, but now I freelance about politics elsewhere.
Very cool. Very cool. Very cool. The Intercept does really good work. So, dude, I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else that you want to say before I end this? I tend to leave the guests with the last point that they want to make.
I would just say, as the presidential race goes on, I think just take everything you read with a little bit of a grain of salt. There's always another side to whatever you're reading. And I'm not saying don't consider it or don't dismiss things out of hand, but just be willing to hear another side on it. And this, once you hear every side, apply a little critical thinking, and then you can think about what you think about it. I think when people rush to judgment on things, sometimes we end up getting things wrong, which might have been some of the case here.
Fair enough. Dude, I appreciate this. And not to mention, not just getting things wrong. It's a foreign territory. Like, I cover politics across the world, but I got to be honest, I don't cover Indian politics. And so it's like information comes out and you try to gauge and value, all right, what's the value of this? Like, what does this mean? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for them? Like that type of stuff. You try to come up with some framework of reality where you can try to get this idea of what's true versus what's false. And, if people saying, the guy was being a bigot or the guy was being racist, I don't want anybody being racist or anything. Now, that's somewhat of a red line to me. But at the same token, I look at her as a politician, and just like other politicians tries to sometimes hide deficits by saying that somebody is racist or sexist or homophobic for looking at those deficits, I can't necessarily put that past her just as a clear, thing.
Sure.
But that said, a lot of this and the attacks seem overblown. So, you know what I mean? It's like, what are her policies? Well, who cares about her policies? She was in some connection with Modi. It's like, yeah, but what are her policies? And what do her policies say about her like, those type of things. I want to hear her talk about those things before I make a decision. And it seems that they've been trying to get her out of this race before the race really even started. So, I do appreciate you coming on and pushing back on some of the stuff that has been thrown at her. Very appreciative.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. I'm going to end this. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all. I may see y'all a little bit later.